This video is generated with AI and is loosely inspired by mythological creatures. The story you're about to hear is largely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be accurate, and this channel takes no responsibility for its factual correctness. Please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to be notified when the next fantastic tale is posted. Fenrir, the wolf of Ragnarök. The bound god. In the depths beneath the world, where light fears to tread and silence weighs heavy as stone, something stirs. The sound begins as a whisper, metal grinding against metal, links stretching, groaning under impossible strain. Then comes the breathing. Deep. Deliberate. Each exhale sends tremors through the bedrock of Midgard. Mountains shudder. Oceans ripple without wind. The very bones of the earth remember what dwells below, bound but never broken, patient but never peaceful. Chains forged from impossibility itself wrap around limbs of shadow and fur. They glow with runes that spell containment, suppression, fear. Yet still they tighten, click by agonizing click, as if the world itself knows what will happen when they fail. In Asgard, the golden halls stand silent. The Aesir do not speak of what lies beneath. They do not mention the island. They do not say his name. But in the deepest hours of night, when even gods dare to dream, they hear it, the steady, patient breathing of the one they betrayed. And in those dreams, a prophecy whispers through the corridors of fate. The wolf will break free. The wolf will feast. The wolf will end all things. The chains tighten once more. But prophecy, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. Birth of the wolf. Long before the binding, before the betrayal, before the island of Lyngvi became a prison, there was a birth. Loki the trickster, shapeshifter and outcast, had taken a wife in the land of the giants, Angerboa, whose name meant anguish-bringer. Their union was spoken of in hushed tones among the Aesir, for nothing good could come from such a pairing. Chaos wed to sorrow, mischief bound to grief. And they were right to worry. 3 children were born of that union, each more terrible than the last. First came Jormungandr, the world serpent, whose body would one day encircle all of Midgard. Second came Hel, half-living and half-dead, who would rule over the realm of the Dishonored departed. And third, youngest but destined to be mightiest, came Fenrir. He arrived not with a cry but with a howl, a sound that pierced the fabric of the 9 realms and made even Odin All-Father pause at his high seat in Hlidskjalf. The sound carried with it a promise, a threat, a future written in blood and ash. The wolf cub was beautiful in the way that storms are beautiful, in the way that avalanches and lightning strikes capture the eye even as they promise destruction. His fur was dark as the space between stars, his eyes burned with intelligence that unsettled even his father. He is magnificent, Loki said, cradling the pup with surprising tenderness. Angerboa did not smile. He is doomed, she replied. As are we all. Word of Loki's children reached Asgard within days. Odin called his council. Thor gripped Mjolnir tighter than usual. Frigg, the All-Mother, spoke the words that would seal 3 fates. The prophecies speak of these 3. They will bring Ragnarök, the doom of gods, the end of worlds. Then we must act, Tyr said, god of war and justice, his hand already moving toward his sword. But Odin raised one hand. Not yet. First, we watch. We cannot strike at shadows and prophesize. We must know them, understand them, perhaps even. He paused, his single eye gleaming with calculation, control them. So the gods waited. And Fenrir grew. He grew faster than any natural creature should. Within a week, he was the size of a horse. Within a month, he stood as tall as a house. His appetite was endless, Whole elk vanished down his throat, yet still he hungered. But it was not just his body that grew. His mind expanded, sharp and calculating, learning the speech of gods and giants, understanding the patterns of the world around him. Loki visited often, bringing food and stories, teaching his son the ways of the world. "You are special, Fenrir," he would say. "More than they will admit. They fear you because they see their own ending in your eyes." "Should I fear them in return?" young Fenrir asked, his voice already deep as thunder. Loki smiled his dangerous smile. "Fear is for those who can afford it. You, my son, can afford nothing but strength." In Asgard, the gods' worry deepened. Each report from those brave enough to observe Loki's dwelling brought more disturbing news. The wolf was not just growing, he was thriving, learning, becoming something more than beast, something approaching divinity in his own terrible way. "We must bring him here," Odin finally declared. "To Asgard. Where we can contain him, watch him, ensure the prophecy does not come to pass." "And if he refuses?" asked Heimdall, watchman of the gods. Odin's expression was grave. "He is still young. Still innocent, in his way. We will not ask him, we will invite him. We will make him believe he is honored, welcomed, revered. And in that belief, we will find our opportunity." Thus began the deception that would echo through eternity. The gods came to Loki's hall dressed in celebration, bearing gifts and speaking words of admiration. They marveled at Fenrir's size, his strength, his obvious intelligence. They asked if he might come to Asgard, to live among gods, to be honored as befitting one of such magnificent power. Loki knew it was a trap. He could read the fear behind their smiles, the calculation behind their courtesy. But he also knew that to refuse would mark his children as enemies before battle had even begun. Perhaps, he thought with characteristic optimism, things might yet turn differently than prophecy foretold. "What do you think, my son?" he asked Fenrir. "Would you walk among gods?" Fenrir, barely grown into his power, looked at the assembled Aesir with eyes that saw too much. He saw their fear, yes, but also their weapons held just a little too ready, their smiles that never quite reached their eyes. He was young, but he was not foolish. Yet something in him, pride, perhaps, or curiosity, or the simple desire to prove that he was more than the monster they feared, made him nod. "I will come," Fenrir said, "and I will show you that prophecy is not destiny, that fear need not breed hatred." The gods smiled their hollow smiles and led him away from his mother's hall. Angerboa watched him go, and she wept, for she alone knew the truth. Prophecy was not warning, it was witnessing. The future was already written. Her son walked willingly toward his doom. As Fenrir followed the gods toward the rainbow bridge of Bifrost, he looked back once at his father. Loki raised one hand in farewell, and in that gesture, Fenrir saw everything: love and regret, pride and sorrow, the knowledge that this separation would end in tragedy. But he was young, and strong, and believed he could change fate itself. How wrong he was. The gods' failed tests. Asgard welcomed Fenrir with feasts and celebration, at least at first. The golden halls rang with laughter, mead flowed freely, and the great wolf was treated as an honored guest. He was given his own space near the training grounds where the Einherjar, the honored dead warriors, practiced for their role in the final battle. Only one god spent true time with him: Ter. Ter, god of war and justice, god of oaths and honor, alone among the Aesir approached Fenrir without weapons drawn or fear barely concealed. He brought meat for the wolf, spoke to him of battle and glory, taught him the warrior's code that governed Asgardian life. "You are strong," Ter said one day as they watched the Einherjar spar. "Perhaps the strongest I have ever known. But strength without wisdom is just destruction." "And what is wisdom?" Fenrir asked, his massive head tilted in curiosity. Knowing when not to use your strength. Knowing that power comes with responsibility. Fenrir considered this. Is that why your fellows watch me always? Is that why I see fear in their eyes when I pass? They think I lack this wisdom. Tr could not lie. It was against his nature. They fear what you might become. Prophecy speaks of Ragnarök, of the wolf who will end the world. They see you and see their doom. But I have done nothing, Fenrir protested, and there was hurt in his voice, the pain of a child condemned for crimes not yet committed. I have harmed no one. I have broken no oaths. Why should I be judged for a future that has not occurred? Because, Tr said quietly, we are all prisoners of fate, Wolfson. Even gods. As weeks passed, Fenrir continued to grow. He was now larger than any building in Asgard, his paws left impressions in the golden streets, his howls at night sent tremors through the foundations of the realm. The Aesir's fear grew with him. In the High Council, Odin spoke the words that would set betrayal in motion: we must bind him. If we cannot prevent the prophecy, we must delay it. We must chain him until we find a way to break fate itself. He has done nothing wrong, Tr objected, standing alone against the council. To bind him for crimes uncommitted is to abandon justice itself. Justice, Odin replied, his one eye cold as winter, is a luxury we cannot afford. Not when all the 9 realms hang in the balance. They began with subtlety. The gods approached Fenrir with a challenge, framing it as a test of his magnificent strength. We have forged a chain, they said, called lading. It is the strongest chain ever made by Aesir smiths. We wonder if even your great might could break it. Fenrir looked at the massive iron links, each as thick as a tree trunk, glowing with runic power. He could smell the trap in their words, see the eagerness in their eyes. But he was proud, and young, and believed that if he proved himself cooperative, proved he was no threat, they might finally trust him. Very well, he said. I will try your chain. They wrapped lading around him, link after massive link, binding his legs and body until he appeared immobilized. The gods stepped back, and for a moment, there was hope in their eyes, hope that it would hold, that prophecy could be denied. Fenrir took a breath. Then another. Then he flexed. The sound was like a mountain breaking. Lading shattered into 1,000 pieces, shards of metal raining down on the golden streets like hail. The gods stumbled backward, and Fenrir stood, pieces of chain falling from his fur like water. An interesting test, he said mildly, though his eyes held questions his mouth did not ask. The gods recovered quickly, their smiles brittle. Magnificent, they declared. But we have another chain, even stronger. Dromi, forged in the deepest furnaces, tempered in the coldest ice. Surely this would challenge even you. Again, Fenrir agreed, though now suspicion had taken root in his heart. This chain was twice as thick, the links inscribed with binding runes that glowed with purple fire. They wrapped it around him carefully, methodically, each god contributing to the binding. This time, when they stepped back, there was prayer in their eyes. Fenrir struggled. The chains held for 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. The gods began to breathe again. Then Fenrir roared, a sound that shook the very foundations of Asgard, and Dromi exploded outward with such force that several gods were knocked from their feet. The wolf stood again, breathing heavily now, pieces of the second chain smoking around him. He looked at the assembled Aesir, and for the first time, there was not hurt in his eyes but understanding. Cold, terrible understanding. You do not test my strength, he said quietly. You test my prison. The gods said nothing. What could they say? The truth hung in the air between them, bitter and undeniable. I have been loyal, Fenrir continued, his voice growing harder. I have been peaceful. I have offered friendship, cooperation, trust. And you repay me with chains, with imprisonment, with confirmation of every fear I might have had about your intentions. The prophecy, one of the gods began. The prophecy, Fenrir snarled, speaks of Ragnarök because of moments like this. You do not prevent fate by acting on fear, you create it. You make me your enemy because you cannot imagine I could be anything else. He turned to leave, to return to his place on the edge of Asgard where he had stayed, alone and watched always. But as he walked, he heard Odin's voice, soft but carrying, "There is one more chain." Fenrir stopped. His shoulders tensed. "No," he said without turning. "No more tests. No more chains. I am done proving myself to gods who have already decided I am guilty." "This one is special," Odin continued. "Made by the dwarfs of Svartalfheim. Light as silk, thin as ribbon. If you can break this, we will know once and for all that nothing can hold you. The testing will end. You will be acknowledged as unstoppable, and we will seek another way." "You lie," Fenrir said flatly. "Perhaps," Odin admitted. "But if I do not, then you gain everything you desire, acknowledgement, freedom, an end to suspicion. And if I do—" He paused. "Well, what have you to lose by one more test?" Fenrir turned then, and looked at the All-Father with eyes that had lost their innocence, their trust, their hope. "Everything," he whispered. "I have everything to lose." But pride and anger warred within him. Pride that said he could break any chain they forged. Anger that demanded he prove them wrong once more, prove that their fear was foolish, that prophecy was just words on wind. "One condition," Fenrir said. "If I am to risk this chain, one of you must place your hand in my mouth as a sign of good faith. If you deal honestly with me, you have nothing to fear. But if you betray me—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The gods looked at one another. None stepped forward. None would risk their hand for a wolf they intended to betray. The silence stretched, damning in its completeness. Then Tyr moved. One step. Two. Walking through the ranks of gods who would not meet his eyes. "I will place my hand in your mouth," Tyr said. "For I alone have treated you with honesty. I alone owe you truth. Even knowing what I suspect?" Fenrir asked. "Especially knowing," Tyr replied. "For I am the god of justice, and justice demands payment for betrayal." In that moment, both god and wolf understood what would happen. They understood, and yet the dance continued, fate's puppets moving through steps already choreographed by destiny. The die was cast. The betrayal set in motion. And all that remained was for the players to speak their lines and accept their roles in the tragedy yet to unfold. Gleipnir. The dwarfs of Svartalfheim were the finest craftsmen in all the 9 realms. In their forges beneath mountains, they had created Mjolnir, Thor's hammer that never missed its mark. They had forged Gungnir, Odin's spear that never ceased its thrust. They had wrought Draupnir, the golden ring that birthed 8 new rings every 9th night. But never had they been asked to create a chain that could bind a god. The request came from Odin himself, traveling to the dark realm with a heavy heart and heavier purpose. He met with Brokkr and Eitri, master smiths whose works were legend, and spoke to them of Fenrir, of prophecy, of the need to bind the unbindable. "Chains of iron he breaks like straw," Odin said. "Chains of steel he shatters like ice. We need something beyond metal, beyond conventional craft. We need impossibility made manifest." The dwarf brothers looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them in the way of those who have worked side by side for countless centuries. "There is a way," Eitri said finally, "but it will require ingredients that do not exist in the waking world. We must forge from the stuff of paradox, from things that are and are not." "Name them," Odin commanded. The sound of a cat's footfall, Brokkr began, counting on his thick fingers. The beard of a woman. The roots of a mountain. The sinews of a bear. The breath of a fish. The spittle of a bird. These things are impossible, Odin said. They do not exist. Precisely, Eitri smiled, though there was no humor in it. Which is why a chain forged from them will hold the impossible wolf. You ask us to bind fate itself, only impossibility can constrain impossibility. How long? Odin asked. We have already begun, Brokkr replied. The moment prophecy spoke of this wolf, we knew this day would come. The Norns themselves have woven this thread. We are merely following the pattern they have set. And so in the deepest forges, where reality bent and purpose superseded physics, the dwarfs worked. They call to them the silence of cats stalking prey, stealing the sound from beneath their paws. They sought out the Valkyries, who in their masculinity possessed the finest of beards, and from them took what should not exist. They dove to the foundations of Yggdrasil itself, finding where mountains end and nothing begins, harvesting roots that grew downward into void. The work took time measured not in days but in significance. Each ingredient required not just gathering but understanding, how to weave the essence of impossibility into something tangible. The sinews of bears that had never existed. The exhalation of fish that breathed water not air. The spit of birds that sang songs of silence. When it was complete, Gleipnir appeared to be little more than a silken ribbon. Smooth, soft, thin enough to snap between fingers. It shimmered with colors that had no names, reflecting light that came from no source. To look at it was to see something that should not be, yet undeniably was. It is beautiful, Odin said, taking the chain in his hands. It weighed nothing. It felt like holding moonlight, like grasping smoke. Will it truly hold him? It will hold anything, Eitri replied. Because it is made from nothing. And nothing cannot be broken, for it was never whole to begin with. Odin returned to Asgard with Gleipnir wrapped around his arm like a bracelet. He summoned the gods to council, showed them the chain, explained its nature. Some were amazed. Some were horrified at what they had asked the dwarfs to create. Tr said nothing, but his jaw was set, his decision made. They chose an island for the binding, Lyngvi, a place of stones and stunted trees in the middle of a lake called Amsvartnir. Remote. Isolated. A place where even if Fenrir's howls shook the world, they would trouble Asgard less. The gods came to Fenrir with false smiles and true fear, speaking of the final test, the chain that would prove him unstoppable. They spoke of glory and honor and acknowledgement. They spoke everything except truth. Fenrir looked at Gleipnir. It appeared so harmless, so delicate. He could smell the magic in it, sense the paradox woven into its strands. Every instinct screamed danger. If this chain is so weak, he said slowly, why do you need me to test it? Why not demonstrate its fragility yourself? The gods stammered, their words tangling. Finally, Odin spoke, because only by seeing you break it can we truly understand your might. Only then will all doubt be erased. You lie, Fenrir said flatly. This is the trap you have been building toward. This is the prison you have spent your fear crafting. The gods did not deny it. How could they? The wolf was right. But, Fenrir continued, I will accept your test. On one condition, the condition I named before. One of you must place your hand in my mouth while you bind me. A gesture of good faith. If you deal truly with me, if this chain can indeed be broken as you claim, then your hand is safe. But if you lie. He showed his teeth, each one like a sword blade. Then someone pays the price of betrayal. The gods looked at one another. The silence was absolute. Even Thor, mightiest of the Aesir, would not step forward. Even Odin, who had sacrificed his eye for wisdom, would not offer his hand. Then Ter moved. He walked through the crowd of gods, each step heavy with knowledge of what was to come. He stood before Fenrir, and the wolf looked down at him with something almost like sorrow. "You know what they will do," Fenrir said quietly. "You know this is betrayal." "I know," Ter replied. "But I am the god of justice and oaths. If injustice is to be done, let it be done with the price paid. Let someone suffer for this Dishonor. It need not be you." "It must be me," Ter said. "For I am the only one who has treated you with honesty. The only one who can look you in the eye and acknowledge what we do here. If this is murder of trust, let the most trustworthy bear the cost." Fenrir opened his jaws. Ter placed his right hand, his sword hand, his oath hand, between those terrible teeth. Their eyes met, god and wolf, justice and fate, betrayer and betrayed. "I am sorry," Ter whispered. "I know," Fenrir replied. The other gods moved quickly then, wrapping Gleipnir around Fenrir's legs, his body, his massive chest. The ribbon seemed almost playful as it wound around him, delicate and harmless. Fenrir let them work, making no resistance, waiting to feel the weakness he could exploit. Then they stepped back, and Gleipnir tightened. Fenrir pulled. The ribbon held. He pulled harder. It did not stretch, did not strain, did not show any sign of weakness. He threw his strength against it, muscles bunching, power flowing through him like thunder. Gleipnir held. Realization crashed over him like a frozen wave. This would not break. Could not break. Was never meant to break. The gods had lied. Fenrir looked at Ter, and the god of justice closed his eyes. In that moment, both knew what came next. Justice demanded it. Fate required it. Trust betrayed always exacts its price. Fenrir's jaws closed. The sound that Ter made was not a scream, he was too proud for that. But it was a sound of anguish, of pain both physical and spiritual. He fell to his knees, his right hand gone, blood streaming from the stump of his wrist. The gods looked away. They could not bear to see the cost of their deception. All except Odin, who watched with his one eye and saw the future taking shape exactly as prophecy foretold. Fenrir spat out Ter's hand, the taste of betrayal bitter in his mouth. He struggled against Gleipnir with all his might, but the chain held. The more he fought, the tighter it became, paradox tightening around him like a noose of impossibility. "You have made me your enemy," Fenrir said, his voice shaking with rage and grief. "You feared the monster of prophecy, so you created him. You worried I would bring Ragnarök, so you ensured I would. Every choice you made in fear has led you here, has led us all here, to this moment of betrayal that seals all our fates." Odin said nothing. What could he say? The wolf spoke truth. "I will wait," Fenrir continued, his voice dropping to a growl that made the stones of Lyngvi tremble. "I will wait in this binding, but I will not forgive. I will not forget. And when Gleipnir finally fails, when the day of reckoning comes, and it will come, for nothing lasts forever, I will remember this betrayal. I will remember each face here. I will remember who bound me, who lied to me, who made me the monster you feared." He threw back his head and howled, a sound of such rage and sorrow that it echoed across all 9 realms. In Midgard, humans cowered in their homes. In Jotunheim, giants looked toward Asgard with grim satisfaction. In Helheim, the dead stirred restlessly. And in the Well of Fate, the Norns smiled, for the thread was being woven exactly as they had always seen it. As the gods departed Lyngvi Island, leaving Fenrir bound beneath the open sky, only Ter looked back. He clutched his bleeding wrist, the cost of justice paid in flesh and trust. "I am sorry," he said again, though Fenrir could no longer hear him over his own howling. "But sorry changes nothing. Sorry cannot unbind chains. Sorry cannot restore trust, cannot rewrite prophecy, cannot undo the moment that doomed gods and giants and all the 9 realms to their eventual ending. The binding was complete. The wolf was imprisoned. And Ragnarök took one more step toward inevitable reality. Imprisonment. Days passed on Lyngvi Island, though Fenrir no longer measured time in such mortal terms. His howling had subsided to occasional outbursts, great bellows of rage that sent waves across Lake Amsvartnir and made the trees on distant shores bend as if in a hurricane. Gleipnir held. Always, it held. The gods had been thorough in their betrayal. They had driven a sword through a stone and through the loop of Gleipnir, anchoring the chain to the very bedrock of the world. The sword, Gjol, they called it, forged specifically for this purpose, went so deep that even Fenrir's tremendous strength could not dislodge it. Then, fearing even this might not be enough, they had placed a second stone upon the first, driving the binding even deeper into the earth. And into that second stone, they had driven another blade, Gelgja, just to be certain. Fenrir was not merely bound. He was entombed above ground, a living prisoner in a cage of impossibility. The gods left him there, alone on the barren island. No visitors came. No food was brought. They reasoned that gods and monsters do not need mortal sustenance. He would not starve, though he would hunger. He would not die, though he would suffer. He would simply exist, bound and broken, until the end of all things. But they had forgotten something in their fear and haste. They had forgotten to bind his jaws. Fenrir howled, and the sound carried across water and land, reaching into the very halls of Asgard. The gods tried to ignore it, tried to continue their feasts and celebrations as if the wolf's anguish was not a constant reminder of their betrayal. But at night, when they lay in their beds, they heard it. And they could not sleep. So they returned, a delegation of Aesir warriors led by those who had crafted the binding. They brought with them another sword, and this one they meant to place in Fenrir's mouth, propping his jaws open so he could no longer voice his rage. Fenrir saw them coming across the water. He recognized their intent in their postures, their weapons, their grim determination. They thought they had taken everything from him. Now they sought to take even his voice. He would not permit it. When they approached, he did not snarl or threaten. Instead, he spoke, his voice calm despite the fury burning in his eyes. "You come to silence me," he said. "As you have imprisoned me. As you have betrayed me. You wish to remove even my voice, so you need never be reminded of what you have done." The gods said nothing. They moved forward with their sword, intending to force it between his teeth. Fenrir began to salivate. It started as a trickle, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth. But it grew, driven by rage and divine power, by the concentrated hatred of a god betrayed. His saliva flowed like a river, thick and viscous, pouring from his jaws onto the stone of Lyngvi. The gods hesitated. The liquid was not normal. It steamed where it touched rock, it glowed with poisonous light, it carried within it all of Fenrir's concentrated fury. They tried to approach, but the flow increased, becoming a deluge, a flood of toxic rage that made even divine flesh burn on contact. They retreated, abandoning their plan. Fenrir had won this small victory. They could not silence him. Not completely. Not without risking more than they were willing to sacrifice. But the saliva did not stop. It poured from Fenrir's mouth day after day, night after night, an endless stream of concentrated hatred. It pooled on the island, then overflowed into Lake Amsvartnir, making the waters toxic and dark. It carved channels through the rock, creating rivers that ran with poison. The Northmen who eventually discovered these flows would call them Van and Vil, the rivers of expectation and hope, though they were neither. They were rivers of rage, flows of betrayal, streams of broken trust made manifest. Where the saliva touched the land, nothing would grow. Where it flowed into the sea, fish died. It was a spreading poison, a geographic manifestation of injustice, and there was nothing the gods could do to stop it. To approach Fenrir meant facing the toxic deluge. To leave him meant accepting this slow corruption of the world. So they left him. They left him to his rage and his rivers of poison, to his binding and his howling. They convinced themselves they had done the right thing, the necessary thing. They told themselves that prophecy had given them no choice. But in their hearts, even the gods knew the truth. They had not prevented Ragnarök. They had ensured it. With every day that Fenrir lay bound, every hour that he suffered for crimes uncommitted, every moment that his betrayal burned in his memory, the eventual reckoning grew closer. Seasons passed. Years. Decades. Fenrir stopped howling as much, conserving his strength. But he did not sleep. He did not rest. He lay in his binding and thought about revenge, about justice, about the day when Gleipnir would finally fail. Because it would fail. Nothing lasted forever, not even chains forged from impossibility. And when it did, when the hour of Ragnarök finally arrived, Fenrir would be ready. He would remember every god who had chained him. He would recall every face of those who had condemned him. And most of all, he would remember Odin, All-Father, Deceiver, the one who had orchestrated this betrayal in the name of preserving what could not be preserved. In the deeps of his imprisonment, Fenrir began to smile. Not with joy, but with terrible anticipation. They had bound him here to prevent the end of the world. Instead, they had created a fury so absolute, so concentrated, so patient in its hatred that when it was finally unleashed, nothing would survive. The gods in their golden halls felt a chill they could not explain. The Norns at the Well of Fate pulled another thread through their loom. And far to the south, in the land of fire, Surtur the fire giant began to sharpen his sword, for he could feel the approaching end of all things. Time moved forward, carrying all of creation toward the moment when chains would break, when rage would be unleashed, when the wolf would finally have his vengeance on the gods who had made him their monster. And Fenrir waited. Patient. Bound. Ready. For fate cannot be delayed forever. And betrayal always demands its price. Ragnarök unleashed. The signs began small, easy to dismiss, easier to ignore. In Midgard, winters grew longer, summers shorter. The sun seemed to shine with less warmth, as if it too feared what was coming. Wolves began to gather in the forests, hundreds of them, thousands, their howls echoing in harmony with a sound that came from beneath the world, the sound of ancient chains beginning to strain. In Asgard, the gods pretended not to notice. They held their feasts. They celebrated their victories. They told themselves that the binding was holding, that prophecy was just stories, that Ragnarök was nothing more than a cautionary tale. Then 3 years of winter came with no summer between them, the Fimbulwinter. Snow fell in Midgard until homes were buried, until forests became frozen wastelands, until humanity huddled in their halls and prayed to gods who had larger concerns than mortal suffering. The sun began to dim. Not slowly, not gradually, but with terrifying speed. Something was pursuing it across the sky. Skoll, the wolf son of Fenrir's lesser kindred, whose only purpose was to chase the sun until the end of days. And now, after millennia of pursuit, he was finally catching up. On Lyngvi Island, Fenrir felt it. The change in the world. The approach of the moment he had been waiting for through centuries of imprisonment. Gleipnir, forged from impossibilities, was beginning to weaken. Not because the materials failed, but because the impossibilities themselves were becoming possible. The roots of mountains were stirring. The beards of women were beginning to exist in the changing world. The sound of cats' footfalls could be heard in the growing silence. Everything that Gleipnir had been made from was slowly coming into being, and as they manifested, the chain's power diminished. Fenrir began to pull. Not with fury, but with purpose. Each day he tested the binding. Each night he felt it weaken, Just slightly, just enough. The gods felt it too, a tremor in their halls, a loosening of certainty, a growing dread that made even Thor grip Mjolnir tighter. Then the earthquakes began. Not in Midgard, in Asgard itself. The foundations of the Golden Realm shook. Bifrost, the rainbow bridge, flickered and dimmed. And from beneath the world came a sound that made even the bravest of Aesir warriors feel fear. The sound of chains breaking. It started with a single snap, a link of Gleipnir separating with a sound like reality tearing. Then another. Another. The impossible chain, forged from paradox and bound with dwarven cunning, was coming apart strand by strand. Heimdall, watchman of the gods, stood at his post and saw it all. He saw Fenrir rising from his island prison, pieces of Gleipnir falling away like spider silk. He saw the wolf grow as his bonds fell away, expanding to a size that dwarfed mountains, that challenged the sky itself. And he lifted Gjallarhorn, the horn that would signal the end of all things, and blew. The sound carried across all 9 realms. In Midgard, humans heard it and knew their end was near. In Jotunheim, the giants gathered their weapons and began their march toward Asgard. In Helheim, the dead stirred and rose, led by Loki himself, freed from his own binding beneath the earth. And in Muspelheim, Surtur the fire giant mounted his flame-wreathed horse and rode north, his sword burning with the fire that would consume the world. But loudest of all, louder even than Gjallarhorn's cry, was Fenrir's howl of freedom. It was a sound of pure rage, of concentrated hatred, of centuries of betrayal crystallized into a single moment of terrible release. It shook the branches of Yggdrasil itself. It made the stars flicker in the sky. It announced to all creation that the wolf was free, and vengeance would be absolute. Fenrir rose to his full height, and the gods saw truly what they had imprisoned. He was massive beyond comprehension, his lower jaw scraping the earth while his upper jaw touched the sky. His eyes burned with fire that had been stoked in darkness for ages beyond counting. Saliva poured from his jaws, the same toxic rivers that had flowed for centuries, now falling like rain across the battlefield. The armies assembled on the field of Vigrid, gods and giants, fire and ice, order and chaos, all converging for the final battle that had been prophesied since the beginning of time. The Einherjar marched from Valhalla, ready to fight for the gods they had served in life. The frost giants came from the north, the fire giants from the south. The dead sailed in Naglfar, the ship made from the fingernails of the deceased. And through it all, Fenrir came for Asgard, his eyes fixed on one target above all others, Odin. The All-Father stood on the field in his golden armor, Gungnir in hand, prepared to face the doom he had tried so long to prevent. Around him gathered the greatest of the Aesir. Thor with his hammer, Freyr with his shining sword, or he would have, if he had not given it away in his foolish youth. Tr with his one hand, standing ready to face the wolf he had betrayed. The battle was joined. Thunder roared as Thor struck down giant after giant. Freyr fought valiantly despite his lack of a proper weapon, until Surtur cut him down with fire. Heimdall and Loki found each other in the chaos and killed each other, fulfilling ancient enmity. Tr faced Garma, the Hound of Hell, and they slew one another in combat. But Fenrir's gaze never wavered from Odin. The wolf charged across the battlefield, crushing warriors beneath his paws. Einherjar and giant alike, it made no difference. His jaws opened wide, so wide that they seemed to swallow the sky itself. Gods scattered before him. Giants fled his path. Nothing could stand before the rage of the betrayed. Odin stood his ground. He had sacrificed much for wisdom, his eye, his comfort, hanging on Yggdrasil for 9 nights to gain knowledge of the runes. He had learned the secrets of fate, understood the patterns of destiny. And he knew, had always known, that this moment would come. Fenrir, he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. I did what I believed I must. I tried to save my people, my realm, all of creation. Fenrir's response was not words but action. He lunged forward, faster than something so massive should be able to move. Odin raised Gungnir, the spear that never missed its mark, and threw it with all his divine strength. The spear struck true, piercing Fenrir's shoulder. The wolf barely noticed. Blood flowed, black as night, but it did not slow him. Nothing would slow him. Not now. Not when centuries of revenge were finally within his grasp. Odin drew his sword and swung it as Fenrir's jaws descended. The blade carved a line across the wolf's muzzle, drawing more blood. Fenrir's jaws snapped shut, and Odin was gone. Death of the All-Father. The battlefield went silent. Even in the midst of Ragnarök, even surrounded by death and destruction, the fall of Odin All-Father made the world pause. Thor heard it from across the field where he battled Jormungandr, the world serpent. He heard the absence, the sudden lack of his father's presence in the world. He roared in grief and rage, and his blows against the serpent redoubled in fury. Frigg, watching from Asgard's walls, felt it, the severing of the bond they had shared for eons. She closed her eyes, and a single tear ran down her cheek. She had known this day would come. The Volva's prophecy had been clear. But knowing did not make the pain less. Vidar, Odin's son, the silent god of vengeance, felt it most of all. He had been created for this moment, born with shoes made from all the leather scraps in the world, prepared his entire existence to avenge his father. He ran across the battlefield, his special shoes allowing him to move faster than any other god. Fenrir stood over the place where Odin had fallen, his jaws stained with divine blood. For the first time in centuries, he felt empty. The revenge he had dreamed of, the justice he had demanded, had been achieved. But it brought no satisfaction, no peace. Only the hollow echo of betrayal answered with betrayal. Then Vidar was upon him. The silent god leaped, placing his special shoe upon Fenrir's lower jaw, the shoe that had been prepared for millennia for this exact purpose. With his other foot, he kicked down on Fenrir's upper jaw, forcing the mouth open. Then he grabbed both jaws and pulled. Fenrir struggled, but Vidar was vengeance incarnate, and vengeance knows no exhaustion. The wolf tried to close his jaws, to swallow this new attacker as he had swallowed the All-Father. But the shoe held, impossibly strong, forged with purpose equal to Fenrir's rage. Vidar pulled harder. His muscles strained. His face contorted with effort. And slowly, impossibly, Fenrir's jaws began to tear apart. The wolf felt pain for the first time since his binding, true, physical agony as his jaw dislocated, as his body began to fail. He thought of his mother, Angerboa, who had wept when he left for Asgard. He thought of his father, Loki, who had loved him despite knowing how his story would end. He thought of Ter, the only god who had shown him honesty, even in betrayal. And he thought of the moment on Lyngvi Island, when Gleipnir had tightened and he had realized that the gods had made their choice. They had chosen fear over trust, prophecy over possibility. They had made him their monster because they could not imagine him as anything else. With a final, terrible crack, Vidar tore Fenrir's jaws apart. The great wolf fell, his blood mixing with the blood of gods and giants on the field of Vigrid. His eyes dimmed, but even in death, they held no regret. He had done what he was created to do, what he had been forced to become. Vidar stood over the body, his father's killer slain. But there was no triumph in his expression. Only weariness. Only the bitter knowledge that this victory was also defeat, that in killing Fenrir, he had merely completed the prophecy, not averted it. Around them, the battle raged on. Thor killed Jormungandr but fell 9 steps later, poisoned by the serpent's venom. Surtur swept his flaming sword across Asgard, and the golden halls burned. The sun was finally devoured by Skoll, plunging the world into darkness. The moon followed, consumed by Hati, the other wolf. The prophecy had been fulfilled in every detail. The gods had tried to prevent it, had chained and imprisoned and fought against fate. And in doing so, they had ensured every word came true. As Fenrir's blood soaked into the earth of Vigrid, it whispered a final truth to the dying world: fear creates what it fears most. Prophecy is not warning, it is witness. And betrayal, no matter how justified it seems, always comes full circle. The wolf died. But his death changed nothing. Ragnarök continued without him, the doom he had been bound to prevent, the end he had been imprisoned to delay. In trying to escape fate, the gods had run directly toward it. And now, in the twilight of their world, they finally understood what Fenrir had known all along. There is no escaping what you are meant to be. There is only the choice of how you face it, with trust or with chains, with honor or with fear. The gods had chosen chains. And chains had brought them here, to the end of all things. Epilogue. After the fire, after the flood, after the world had burned and the gods had fallen, there came silence. The 9 realms were gone. Asgard lay in ruins. Midgard was drowned beneath dark waters. Even Yggdrasil, the world tree, stood bare and broken, its branches burned, its roots torn. But silence does not last forever. From beneath the waves, new land began to rise. Green and fresh, untouched by war, unburdened by prophecy. The sun returned, not the old sun, but its daughter, born from the flames of Ragnarök to light a new age. 2 humans emerged from the shelter of the world tree, Lif and Lifrasir, life and longing, ready to repopulate the world. And in the halls that were being rebuilt, a new generation of gods gathered. Sons and daughters of the fallen Aesir. Vidar was there, the avenger who had slain Fenrir. Vali stood beside him. Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, carried their father's hammer. Balder and Hodda returned from Helheim, reborn into a world that had learned the cost of its mistakes. They spoke of the old world, of the battle, of how prophecy had unfolded exactly as foretold despite every attempt to prevent it. And they spoke of Fenrir. Was he evil? Asked one of the younger gods, who had never known the age before Ragnarök. Vidar, who had killed the wolf, considered the question carefully. No, he said finally. He was what we made him. We feared him, so we bound him. We bound him, so he hated us. He hated us, so he fulfilled the prophecy we feared. We created our own doom with chains forged from terror. Then the prophecy caused the end. No, another voice answered. It was Balder, who had died and returned, who had seen death and understood it better than any living god. The prophecy showed us the end. We caused it by trying to change what we saw. If we had trusted Fenrir, if we had shown him the honor Tr tried to show him, perhaps fate would have written itself differently. Could it have been different? The young god asked. The older gods looked at each other. None had an answer. How could they know? They had walked one path only, made one set of choices. The road not taken remained forever unknown. What matters, Vidar said, is that we remember. We remember Fenrir not as a monster, but as a warning. We remember that fear can create the very thing it seeks to prevent. We remember that prophecy fulfilled is not the same as prophecy inevitable. On the field where Vigrid had been, where gods and giants and monsters had battled until the world ended, grass now grew. Green and soft, covering the scars of battle. And there, where Fenrir had fallen, where his blood had soaked the earth, a single tree began to grow. It was not a mighty oak or an ash. Just a small sapling, young and fragile. But it grew in soil enriched by divine blood, and it carried within it a memory, not of hate, but of betrayal answered, of chains broken, of a wolf who had been given no choice but to become the monster they feared. The gods left it to grow. They did not cut it down or fear what it represented. They let it stand as a monument, a reminder that the new world must be built on different principles than the old. On trust, not fear. On freedom, not chains. On the understanding that destiny is shaped by choices, and every choice matters. In the roots of that tree, if one listened carefully, one might hear an echo. Not a howl of rage, but something gentler, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps acceptance, perhaps simply the acknowledgement that every story ends, and every ending is also a beginning. The wolf was dead. The gods were reborn. The world turned on, as it always had, as it always would. But the question remained, whispered in the wind, carved into the bark of the growing tree, woven into the very fabric of the new age. Was fate fulfilled, or created? Did the prophecy show what must be, or did it show what would be because of what was done to prevent it? Were the Norns weaving the tapestry of time, or merely recording what was always going to unfold? The gods pondered this question as they rebuilt their halls. Humans wondered as they repopulated the earth. And deep in the roots of the tree that grew on Fenrir's grave, the question lived on, eternal and unanswerable. Perhaps that was the final lesson of the wolf. Perhaps that was the true ending to his story. Not in his death, not in his revenge, but in the question he left behind, a question that would echo through every age, every story, every moment when fear and prophecy met. What do we become when others decide what we must be? And what might we have been if they had simply let us choose? The tree grew taller, reaching toward the new sun. And the world, reborn from fire and flood, moved forward into an uncertain future, wiser, perhaps, for the lessons of the past. But only time would tell if wisdom would be enough. For prophecy never truly ends. It simply begins again, in different forms, with different faces, asking the same eternal question. Will we break the cycle, or will we forge new chains? Only time, and choice, would tell. The end. Please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to be notified when the next fantastic tale is posted.